Hey guys, welcome back. We've done a lot of practice with making inferences, and we're going to elaborate a little bit by including some strategies here. So we want to make sure that we know what inferences are and that we're inferring things correctly. So what we're going to do is get a little bit of practice in and put your strategies that you've already learned to the test and maybe even add a little bit more to your toolkit. Okay? So making inferences, as you've heard this phrase before, is also sometimes known as reading between the lines. So when you make an inference, you use all the information that you have available at that time in that moment to make the best guess as to what is behind what's literally going on. So in most cases in English class, right, it's the information from a text. So you need to go beyond what's stated explicitly in the text to infer what the intended message is, what the author actually meant by paying attention to certain clues. Okay, and again, we've talked about this. This is just a different way to restate what you've already been told. Okay, so what do we infer? You infer why things happen, why characters behave the way they do, and how characters are feeling. You enter the world created by the author, and you create images and inferences based on what the author tells you and your own knowledge and beliefs about that world. So in order to infer meaning, readers must combine the information that the author has written with their own experiences, your own experiences, both reading experiences and life experiences. And that's something good to add to your notes that maybe we haven't talked about yet. So we've gone over the inference chart many times. We've got 3 columns. You've got what you're saying, what you know, and then what those things combine to allow you to infer. And we've talked a lot in the middle column, your schema, about what you already know based on your life experiences. But something I also want you to think as you grow as readers is that your schema should also contain what you already know based on what you've read before. So typically a lot of what comes to mind first is what we know from personal experience, but don't forget to add the experience or the things that you know from reading. So that can also be part of your schema. Okay. All right. So making inferences in our daily lives. I've told you multiple times that we do this every day without even knowing we're doing it. So if the teacher writes information on the board during a lesson, you can infer that it's important information that you may need to know later. So typically you write it in your notebook. If your mom tells you to carry an umbrella, well, you can infer that it might rain today. If you see your boss arguing with an employer, you can infer that it's probably not the right moment to ask for a raise. Note, you may not always be correct in your inferences, but they are the assumptions that you make based on the clues that you're given and the knowledge that you have at that time. And again, we've talked about that before too. We might be in the same situation and infer something different. That's okay. You're using your prior knowledge and I'm using mine. So now it's your turn. We're going to practice. You already know how to make everyday inferences, so we're going to take a look at a few scenarios and infer what might be going on. All right, so in our first exercise here, you see a hulked out Homer Simpson. And so think about this kind of scenario. Look at what's going on in this little comic image here. It says, you go home and see your father shouting and a bit violent. Would you ask him for permission to go to a party? Would you ask him for money? Think about that. Most of you are probably like, I don't have to think about it. What am I thinking about? Play along. So if your father acts in that way, we can infer that he's probably what? Angry. And so for that reason, it's probably not the right time to ask for money or permission to do anything. And again, if you are seeing this or hearing this, reading this, and thinking to yourself, oh yeah, that reminds me of the time, right? It's probably because when things like this happen in your real life, you're not sitting there thinking, oh, in English class, I was taught how to make an inference. It just happens naturally. So if you heard about this in this exercise and knew right away that you wouldn't ask your dad for money or permission, then it's because you're programmed with these abilities to access any prior knowledge and use the evidence that you see in order to make a good decision or a good assumption as to what's going on. So this is just a really good reminder that if something like this happens in your real life and you're very quick to know what's going on, it's because you know how to infer. So pat yourself on the back because you probably already had that skill. Exercise number 2. Okay, so you're watching a horror movie, right? And this is like the typical classic scene, right? You see a bloody scene and a bloody knife, right? So what may have happened? If this is what you see, what do you think? You're like, it's not taking me that long to think about this. Well, if you see a bloody knife, it's possible somebody was killed, right? Okay. What about this picture? So I see a clock on the wall. I see a sign on the wall that says patents. What's the big idea? I see these 2 guys. It looks like this one's glancing up at the clock. I see a stack of papers. And then down here, so it's a comic, I see it says, I wish someone would invent faster clocks. So look at the picture. Think about where they might be. Think about who they might be. And why they would want someone to invent a faster clock. Think about that. Take a couple seconds. Okay. So for the poster that says patents, okay, and then the pile of documents, the drawer and the books, we can infer that they're probably in an office. The very first image of our PowerPoint was a patents office. And so that's what this actually comes from. And you'll see the patent sign on the door. So we're going to infer that they're at work because they are in an office. So they're office workers of some type. We're assuming in a patent office. So a patent, as you guys know, is when somebody comes up with a big idea and they want to patent it to secure it and make sure nobody steals their idea. So number 3, it says, as he wishes someone would invent a faster clock. Why would he wish that? Why would he wish somebody invented a faster clock? Well, of course, you can't invent a faster clock. Time is time, right? But the joke is that he's anxious. He's watching the clock. He's desperate to go home. He wants to get out of there. So the joke is that if only someone would invent a faster clock, we could go home sooner. So that's just a little funny one. All right, so let's talk about inferences as word pictures. So as you looked at the previous pictures, you were able to infer things about the scenarios that they presented. So when you read a text, think of it as a word picture. So we talked about watching short films, watching clips from full-length movies, and looking at comics. We've looked at a lot of things over the past couple of days in our different online lessons. So what you can do, if it's helpful because you're a visual learner, is that when you're reading a text, just use the imagery that's given to you and make this picture in your head so that when you're trying to infer meaning, you have an image in your head because of the text that was written, okay? So that's just going to help you kind of process what's going on and what the real meaning might be, okay? All right, so when reading, there are several types of word pictures the author will paint for you. So there's the setting, there's a character's personality or their emotions, what their motives might be, what the writer's motives behind writing the piece may be. So that all kind of boils down to author's purpose as well. So we're going to practice. I'm going to give you a scenario and then you're going to answer some questions. And actually, why don't you go ahead, continue in your notes. This is going to be your exit ticket for today. So I'll read it and then you go ahead and write down what you think the answer is. So Jeffrey awoke early that morning for fear of being late for his appointment. He showered, brushed his hair, and put on his best suit. He stuck extra ink pens and pencils into his briefcase. He did not want to leave anything to chance. He knew that if he did not get a job soon, Martha would have to leave the children and go back to work. So, what kind of appointment is Jeffrey getting ready for? A, he's going job hunting. B, he's going to a board meeting for his job. Or C, he is going to a job interview. Think about that. Write down your answer. Think about the evidence too. We've talked before about finding evidence, so we're going to make sure that we highlight the evidence. So here we go. In red, you'll see I highlighted he knew that if he did not get a job soon, okay? So the writer is suggesting that the appointment is a job interview, and that will solve this problem. So we can assume that he's not going job hunting because that does not require an appointment. So the fact that he actually has an appointment means that he's probably locked a job interview. So the correct answer is C. If you got that right, pat yourself on the back. Let's move on to number 2. So Jeffrey awoke early that morning for fear of being late for his appointment. He showered, brushed his hair, and put on his best suit. He stuck extra ink pens and pencils into his briefcase. He did not want to leave anything to chance. He knew that if he did not get a job soon, Martha would have to leave the children and go back to work. So this is the same example from the last question, but this question is, who is Martha? Is Martha Jeffrey's mother, Jeffrey's wife, or Jeffrey's daughter? Think about that. And if this is coming easy to you, then great. You're just proving to yourself that you do know how to infer. Okay, so the answer, of course, is B, his wife. So Martha would have to leave the children and go back to work. So this sentence in red suggests that Martha's the mother of Jeffrey's children and not his mother or his child, because that would impact him and his lifestyle, right? So he needs to get a job so that his wife can stay home and watch the kids, is what this author is alluding to. Next one. Jeffrey awoke early that morning for fear, this is the last time I'm going to read this one, for fear of being late for his appointment. He showered, brushed his hair, and put on his best suit. He stuck extra ink pens and pencils into his briefcase. He did not want to leave anything to chance. He knew that if he did not get a job soon, Martha would have to leave the children and go back to work. Which of these personality traits best fits Jeffrey? Responsible, optimistic, or selfish? Think about it. Write it down in your notes. And we believe that Jeffrey is responsible. We highlighted that Jeffrey awoke early. He stuck extra pens and pencils just in case. He didn't want to leave anything to chance. So these words describe a man who is responsible. There are no suggestions that he's optimistic or selfish in the text. Although he may be those things, we don't have evidence to support that. The only evidence that we have is that he is being responsible. Next. So what is Jeffrey's motive for waking up early? What do you think his motive would be? Where can I put this? Over here. So to be an example for his children, to be on time for his appointment, or he does not want Martha to go back to work. Think about it. So he knew that if he didn't get a job soon, Martha would have to leave the kids and go back to work. So C is that he doesn't want Martha to go back to work. So he wants to make sure that he gets up early and doesn't want to be late. But that's not wanting to be late isn't the ultimate motive. So his ultimate motive would be that this being on time and setting himself up for success in this interview would ultimately allow him to hopefully get the job, and then Martha could stay home because he doesn't want Martha to have to go to work. Okay, so that one was maybe a trick question. Maybe you said B, that he wanted to be on time, but his ultimate goal would be for Martha to stay home. Okay, so those are just some fun little examples of how to make sure that you're inferencing things appropriately with the text given or the clues given. So just remember after this activity that whenever you're faced with text that you're asked to infer, create an image in your head and make it that much easier for you to properly infer the right thing based on the information you have. All right, so thanks for joining today, and we'll see you again next time.